Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, welcome to YouTube Live. Cool to see you. Happy Friday. And now you might notice that things are a bit different around here. We've got the usual camera, but it's kind of hooked up in a way that I'm attempting to live stream right now. So let me know if it's even remotely working. Hey, Shannon. Hey, Tiago, Floor, Paul. We've got a really cool topic for today, which I'm going to cover in just a second. But yeah, I've been trying really hard to get my my tech upgraded. It's not easy, but it is always fun. So as you know from today's topic, we're going to be talking about whether or not you can learn two languages at the same time. I'll answer your questions at the end as well. I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter than normal today. We'll go for about 20 minutes or so. And then hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions that you guys have by the end. Does that sound good? All right then. So this is going to be a live podcast recording, as you know. So I'm going to do the intro to the podcast, and then if you want to listen to the podcast, well, you can hit it up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll be able to hear this there as well. Gringo Glot. Hey, Andrew. Hey, how's it going? All right then. Shall we start? Hey, Juan Carlos. Oh, so many of you guys here. That's awesome. All right then. We've got, how many people do we have? We've got, oh, so cool. Over 50 of you here. Hey, Joe. Hi, Hamid. All right then. So let's get started, and then I'll answer your questions diligently at the end. All right then. So with that said, let's crack on. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. I've been having a great week. Here in the UK, it's been absolutely roasting. 30-something degrees every day, pretty much the same at night. But of course, like properly hot countries, or unlike properly hot countries, we have no such thing as air conditioning over here. So I've been, your humble polyglot host has been sweltering away in the heat. I've been taking some walks on the beach, trying to be outside as much as possible. It's pretty nice. I am not complaining for a second. Hope things are good where you are. I have lots of friends in Australia and South Africa, and I'm very aware that it is not exactly the height of summer for you guys over there. So, you know. But, you know, your time will come 6 months from now. The shoe will be on the other foot. So today we've got a great question, and it comes from Bash Fakosh on YouTube. And so I will tell you what that is in just a second, and then we'll get into it. So if you are new here, then please take a second to subscribe to the podcast or follow the podcast through the usual means. That way you get these episodes updated to you automatically, and you won't miss a trick. And as usual, if you want to ask me any questions for the podcast, you can do so by going to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. All right, then, so without any further ado, it is time for today's question, and it is, can you learn two languages at the same time, or is it a complete disaster? And thank you, Bash, for this question. And it's one of the questions, probably actually the question that has come up the most on the podcast over the years. It seems to be something that people ask a lot. And I'm going to answer this in two different ways, because I think there is the kind of technical answer based on like total efficiency, and there's the more human answer. So I'm going to give you those two perspectives, and then you can make your mind up for your righteous self at the end. So my basic position on learning two languages, or three languages, or four languages at the same time is that it's not advisable. And the reason is that language learning comes down to focus. Learning even one language to a good level requires an awful lot of focus. And the more you can focus, the greater depth to which you can focus, the more you're going to learn in the language, and the faster you're going to advance. I remember back when I was in Japan and I was trying to get to grips with Japanese, and I think back sometimes to all the things that I used to do to learn Japanese, and I'm thinking about, like, you know, I'm sitting there learning kanji. I'm trying to read Japanese. I'm I'm spending time watching TV. I'm doing all like language exchange after language exchange. I'm working so hard to try to get the language into my head and to reach a good level. And it reminds me of this kind of relentless focus and this relentless pursuit, this relentless training every day. And the time when I really made my breakthrough with Japanese was when I was kind of doing this for like months and months and months on end. Even though there was kind of like no light at the end of the tunnel, I was really carrying on and just pushing through. And I remember very, very clearly that progress, the way that I felt it at least, kind of came in very, very jumpy moments. It would come all of a sudden. It would be like I'd be studying for a month or two and feel no progress, and then all of a sudden I'd suddenly realize that I'd made this progress. And what I want to tell you about here is how that little experience with Japanese was how I learned all of my languages, and they've been one at a time. So the very first language I learned was when I was learning, when I was 19 years old, I was learning French, and then after French I went on to learn Spanish and Portuguese. But starting there with French, I went to live in Paris and I was learning French, getting to a very, like, really practicing it as much as possible, and it took me 6 months to get to a good level. And it was only after that then when I spoke the language really well that I moved on and I started to learn Spanish. And then with Spanish I'd spent years working at the language, studying it, like being with friends, like getting to a point where I really spoke it. And then I kind of moved on to Portuguese and did the same thing with Portuguese. Sometimes I think people kind of look at polyglots and they think, well, how, like, that sounds pretty cool, I want to do that. And so they set out and they learn like 4 languages at the same time, saying, right, I'm going to become a polyglot by doing that, by learning like all these languages at the same time. But in my case, and in the case of almost all of the prolific language learners I know, success has been sequential. And so this is a concept I think is worth remembering. Success is sequential with languages. I don't know any polyglots that have sort of sat and studied 3 or 4 languages at the same time and got to a really good level with them. It's always been like choosing one language, having this passion to learn, and then studying it really hard, really focusing hard then, until you get to a point where you've found success with the language. You can speak it well. You're at this kind of, the target to aim for usually is like an upper intermediate level, B2 level. You get to that level and then you know the language. You're not going to forget it, and then it's almost like you kind of feel, okay, well, this language is part of me now. And then gradually what happens is your attention starts to turn elsewhere. And then you say, oh, this other language over here, like that sounds kind of interesting. And then you start to learn that and follow the same process. Success is sequential. It's just like, those cartoons. You ever seen this cartoon of the 2 guys digging for gold? One guy kind of goes digging and digging and digging and digging. And then he eventually kind of comes across this big pot of gold. And then the second guy is digging and digging and digging and digging, and then thinks, actually, you know what? No, that's not the right direction. And he changes direction, then changes direction again. And each time he's like almost getting to the gold, but not quite. With language learning, it's like that. Focus is directly proportional to how much you learn. And so, getting back to the question, can you learn 2 languages at the same time? What's behind this question really is asking, is it a good idea to do that? And if we're talking about purely from a sort of efficacy point of view, purely from the perspective of like, is it efficient? Am I going to be able to do this? Then clearly the answer is no. It's like, who is going to be more successful? The guy who grows up, training to be a footballer, like going to the practice ground every day for his entire childhood to learn to be like the next Lionel Messi, or is it going to be the guy that does that and also tries to play tennis at the same time? The place where you put your focus is where you're going to succeed. And so if you're trying to learn 2 languages at the same time, you're simply dividing your focus. You're taking precious time and attention away from the first language, which means you are inevitably going to learn less. And for that reason, I don't recommend learning 2 languages at the same time. But, ladies and gentlemen, the story is not yet finished, because most people have no need to become a polyglot like me. They have no need to learn many, many different languages. For many people, it's actually much more about the fun. It's about how does learning languages improve your life? What value does it bring to you? And so, if you are someone that's passionate about languages, and you're learning your first one or two languages and you're thinking, you know what, I really love Spanish and I really love Chinese. I really want to learn them both at the same time. And if this is something that you really want to do for yourself and for your life, then I'd say absolutely go for it. Learn 3 at the same time if you want. Life's too short not to do the things that you want to do. But I think it's important for you, if you're thinking about this question, to really just make sure that it's clear. Make sure that you're clear on why you're doing it. If your aim is to learn languages to a high level and do it in the most efficient way possible, if you've got a deadline, if you're moving to Germany next year and for a job and you need to have good German by that point, if that is your goal, then it is relevant to know that it's not going to be a good idea for you to learn another language at the same time. But if your goal is just to maximize enjoyment and maximize pleasure from life, then I say go for it, have fun, and then may come a point where you're like, you know what, I'm enjoying learning these 3 languages, but it would be quite nice to get to a really good level in one of them. And when that time comes, then it is a good idea to kind of pare back what you're trying to do and then focus on that one language, because focus is directly proportional to the success you're going to have. And if you want to get to a good level in a language, you need to focus on that language. And if you want to learn multiple languages to a high level, then success is sequential. But ultimately, the older I get, the more I think that actually, life is there to be. Life's too short not to do the things you want to do. So with that, do with that what you will. I don't know what the correct answer is, but you've heard my thoughts. At least not for the first time on the podcast, and I doubt very much it will be for the last time, but for what it's worth, those are my thoughts on learning 2 languages at the same time. So thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to ask me a question for the podcast, then you can leave me a voice message at the following link, iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. That's iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask, and I will pick up your message. I'll play it on a future edition of the podcast and answer it there. So I hope that has been helpful and food for thought. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast. Take care. All right, guys, there we go. That's my live podcast done, and now I'm going to sit and answer your questions. I anticipate there'll be people disagreeing with me here, but let's see. So if you've got any questions, type them in. I'm going to stay on for about another 5 minutes or so and answer as many of these as I can. I'll probably cherry pick questions here. I'll make sure I'm staying on topic as much as I can. So Matthew asks, Ollie, this makes sense. Can I ask, what do you recommend to put in, how much time to put in practice per week? Okay, cool. So how much time, so if you're focusing on one language, and how much time to put into it? It's the length of a piece of string, but generally, there's a commonly accepted figure, which is that if you want to develop a new skill, then you need to be putting in between 10 to 20 hours a week, all right, at that thing. If you put in less than 10 hours a week, then it's just there's not enough time being spent for you to really make progress. For me, I tend to say, look, if you're serious about learning, you need to be spending an hour a day on the language. Like, yes, you can make progress with less, absolutely. And yes, it's worth doing even 5 minutes a day. But learning a language is a long road. And so if you're serious about it, you need to be putting in at least an hour, in my humble but accurate opinion. All right then. Michael asks, another Michael, how does learning multiple languages simultaneously change when you've already learned other languages successfully? I don't think it does, because no matter when you've already learned multiple languages, what will happen is you get quicker at the process, but it's still going to interfere if you're trying to learn 2 or 3 at the same time. It may be the case that after you've learned multiple languages, it's like in my case, right? Because I've studied 10 languages, some not to very meaningful levels, but nevertheless, I'm at a point now where I really don't care. I've got nothing to prove. I don't care what people think about my languages or my different levels. I'm just doing it for pure pleasure and love of it, right? So sometimes I might dabble, but I'm very aware that that's what's going on. If I want to pick up, say, Polish next year, I'm going to do just Polish. So I don't think it changes. And okay, question here. What advice would you give to a language hopper? Someone who gets bored quickly and switches languages frequently. I mean, again, it's the same thing. If this is how you want to spend your time, then that's absolutely fine. I think if there's a one language you really want to learn and you still find yourself jumping from one language to the next, then either you don't really care about that one language that much, or else you're avoiding the hard work. And so, sooner or later, this comes back to the big question. I mean, look, the reason that most people fail at language learning is because they're not willing to put in the work. So it's kind of a bigger question than I can solve right now. Joe says, I've been studying French with Duolingo, Pimsleur and Speakly. I can't pick up the spoken words. Do I trust the process or should I do something differently? Joe, I would say stop using apps. Apps, for me, suck your attention. They increase distraction. They don't really get to grips with the real language. If you're struggling to understand the spoken word, then you need to do two things. You need to train your ear better, and you need to just increase your overall language level. So I would suggest that you put all your apps back in their box and that you start actually immersing yourself in the language. Read stories. I've got books like mine, plenty of other books as well. Start listening to things at your level with transcripts. That's how you're going to improve your listening. All right, then let's see what else we've got. Okay, so great example here from Lips. Mackenzie says, I find I mix French and Italian sometimes because I'm currently learning both. I've been learning French for 8 months now and started Italian about a month ago. So this is what happens. When you learn two languages at the same time, you mix them and you end up getting confused with both of them. So generally, it is easier. If you're going to learn two languages at the same time, it's better that they are separate, right? So French and Japanese, Italian and Swahili. It's going to be easier. If you're learning two Romance languages at the same time, they're very close. And so your brain is going to get confused. So, Lips, what I would recommend is, if it's a concern for you, then I would go back to, put Italian on ice, go back to French and really work hard at your French until you've got it up to a good, strong B2 level. And then switch your focus to Italian. And what's going to happen then is, you're going to learn Italian, and then you will still mix up French and Italian, but the difference then will be that you're going to have both of them to such a strong level in your brain that with some practice you'll be able to tease them apart. I remember going through that quite clearly with Spanish and Portuguese. I learned really good Spanish. Then I went to Brazil, learned really good Portuguese, and I came back home and mixed them up. So I had to spend time actually speaking both at the same time with friends to actually just kind of try to tease them apart. So yeah. Okay. So hopefully that's answered Neil's question here as well. Really, all of this, guys, like you've got the argument for efficiency, and then you've got the argument for pleasure and life experience, and you've really got to choose which is best for you. So yeah, Eric asked, so when did you personally know when it was time to move on to the next language? I'm having trouble deciding myself. So here's the thing. I've always learned languages based on my life circumstances, right? So when I met a bunch of Brazilian people in London, I learned Portuguese because I wanted to. I couldn't. When I want to learn a language, I cannot stop myself, right? Similarly, when I fall out of love or it's time to stop, I can't stop myself either. So then later when I went to Japan, I learned Japanese. I think it's very difficult if you're kind of setting yourself these arbitrary timelines, because like you say though, when do you start and stop? Like, who's to say if you're right and wrong? Like, that's really difficult. So I think all I can say is, in my experience, what's helped is just let it be led by your life trajectory and make your decisions based on that. All right, what else have we got here? Okay, interesting question from Gringo Glot. Can you distinguish between learning multiple languages and maintaining multiple languages? Yeah, good question. So when we're talking about learning, this is the process of acquiring the language from zero to can speak, right? And this thing about keeping language, only doing one language at a time, this applies to learning a language. So when you're in the process of learning how to speak it. when you're talking about once you've learned a language and you're talking about maintaining it, then I think you can mix up languages as much as you want. Because, for a polyglot, the challenge is actually how do you use all these languages as part of your life? So, in my life, I regularly use Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Cantonese on a regular basis, and sometimes French. And I have to use all of them a lot in order to keep them wired and maintained, right? So I think if you're in maintenance mode, mix as much as you want. I think that's fine. All right, let's have a couple more. You're welcome, Matt. Okay, any last questions? Let's have a look here. Okay, Christopher says, I've seen many of your videos, so I know the reading method, but what if I don't really understand the stories in German? So yeah, this is a common misconception. I published a video last week, which was how do you start reading as a beginner? And what's happened, I think, is that my books of short stories have become so popular that people are kind of thinking, well, that's the story learning method, but actually it's not. My story learning method is mostly in courses which I teach. So if you go to my website, which is iwillteachyoualanguage.com, you will find courses which teach the story learning method. So if you want to learn German, I have the German Uncovered course, and this teaches you German through stories. You can't pick up my books as a complete beginner and start reading them like that. There's a step in between there. So story learning as a method to learn a new language is something that I teach in my courses because I wanted to give people a way to start learning a language with stories, so that they're kind of learning through immersion at the beginning. But yeah, I wouldn't pick up my short story books as a complete beginner. All right then, let's see. Last question maybe. Let's see. By the way, guys, whilst you're waiting, hit the like button on this video if you've enjoyed this so far. Let me know in the comments if there's one thing that you've picked up from this. Okay, Nisha, good question, right? How do I know if I'm at a B2 level? When I understand most of what I read or listen, even difficult. Yeah. So generally, my test for the B2 level is called the pub test. Can I sit down with you in a pub or a bar and enjoy a conversation that night with a drink on like whatever topic, such that we both enjoy it, we both have a laugh, and we are not hindered in any way by language or by linguistic difficulties, right? That's what B2 feels like. You've got genuine friends who you can genuinely talk to. What this means in concrete terms is that you can understand pretty much 95% of daily interactions. You can articulate what you want to say with quite some accuracy. You can read a book at that level, but you perhaps don't have what you don't yet know. Perhaps is there might be some grammar that you haven't, some more complex grammar you haven't mastered. There might be some vocabulary topics you're not aware of. You might not be that good at academic writing, for example, but generally you can function very, very well in the language. So hope that's helpful. I think we will leave it there. One last one, can't resist, from Ryu says, do you have any tips to learn languages whose word order is different from your mother tongue? I'm a Japanese who learns European languages. I know you speak Japanese and Cantonese. Yeah, so there are easier languages and there are difficult languages, right? If you're learning a language that's difficult, meaning further away from your native language, it's going to take longer. But that's the only meaningful difference. Something like word order is something that you master from lots of exposure to the language, okay? So the time that you're really going to master word order is when you are reading a lot in the language and listening a lot to stuff in the language. Over time, by consuming lots of content, then eventually word order will start to become natural. I remember that it was like that for me with Japanese. lots of people I meet who are learning Japanese find the word order very, very confusing. For me personally, I find it quite straightforward because I've spent so much time listening to Japanese, reading Japanese, and just being around Japanese. It just becomes normal over time. So I said, don't sweat it, don't stress too much. Keep reading, keep listening, and then that will improve over time. All right, guys, that's it. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you back next Friday for the next live session. Cheers.